We are talking about the very same people, but those people were mostly condemned in some terrorism activities because the United States government is very keen not to handle any suspect that might be mistreated or even lead to his death under some torture or something like this. They can't take this blame.
Hossam El-Hamalawi, let me put that point to you, because I saw you shaking your head there. I mean, Amnesty International goes on to...
Yes, that's not a perfect model at all.
Yeah.
That's not a perfect model at all. I mean, the so-called Western democracies who preach every day like democracy should not support, whether it's financially or militarily, any of the third world dictatorships, let alone the Mubarak's dictatorship. I personally worked on a Human Rights Watch report in 2004-2005, trying to track down those disappeared suspects in the global gulag run by the US government, and which the Egyptian prisons were also part of. The majority of those detainees that were sent to us from abroad on these ghost planes, these detainees, most of them were actually innocent. They just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And even if they were guilty of committing terror crimes, definitely the US, when shipping them here to Egypt, knew what was going to await them when they arrived here in Cairo. And that did not disappoint actually the Americans. Those suspects, as soon as they arrived, and many of them were taken to the state security headquarters in Nasr City, which we stormed yesterday because it's so close to the airport. That's why the regime built it there, so as to avoid the downtown traffic when it came to shipping those high-price value detainees. So I do not regard this as a perfect model, to sum up, and I think that Western governments should stop any sort of dealings with third world dictatorship security services.
Okay, Theodore Karasik, let me get a final point from you because we're running out of time.
Sure.
What's your thought on the issue of extraordinary rendition to Egypt and the collaboration between Egyptian and American intelligence agencies?
It was a system that was in place. I think that it was, as I mentioned before, part of America's outreach. I do agree with the previous speaker that there needs to be a reassessment, if you will, of this type of collaboration. We are entering a new order where dictatorships are falling by the wayside, and regimes that use torture and so on are not going to be tolerated anymore.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thanks to our guests, Hisham Safi Eldon, Theodore Karasik and Hossam El-Hamalawi. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.
Rhythms of resistance.
A part of the struggle and popular resistance is art. Through my art, I resist. Resistance is my art, and my art is my war.
Musicians using music as a way to maintain their cultural identity.
I believe that when I sing to the world, I portray Palestine through my voice, my singing, and my songs.
Songs from the lost homeland. At this time on Al Jazeera.
What Gaddafi has done, he dismantled or destroyed the system in the country.
As chaos and violence sweep across Libya.
They're living through fear, they're living through a nightmare.
They're using ammunition, live ammunition.
Al Jazeera hears from those who have lived in fear of Gaddafi's regime.
We don't want him to leave. We want to arrest him. 42 years is too much.
Libya, a state of terror. At this time on Al Jazeera.
A debilitating condition afflicting millions of women across the developing world.
Sometimes it is not possible to cure a patient with fistula. We have to prepare her psychologically.
Revealing the human stories behind fistula and its intimate connection to poverty. A powerful new series exploring global maternal health. Birthrights. At this time on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera focused in the face of danger.
Israeli commandos descended upon the ship.
We focused on political change and political miscalculations. On the power of one voice and the pain of a people. We focused when the world froze
has delivered so little
and countries burnt. Throughout Europe, we focus on news and documentaries that matter to you. Al Jazeera, television that truly inspires.
This is Al Jazeera.
Good to have your company. Warm welcome to this news hour, coming to you live from Doha with me, David Foster. And from Al Jazeera's news centres here in Doha, at London and Washington, D.C. These are the top global stories. Attack, counter-attack. Government forces launch a fierce offensive on opposition rebels across Libya.
I'm Felicity Barr in London with the latest from Europe, including Al Jazeera reveals that a British diplomatic team, including special forces, which were apparently detained by rebels in Benghazi, have now been released.
I'm Nick Clark in Washington. The top story from the Americas.
We don't want troops on the ground. They don't want troops on the ground. That would be counterproductive.
The top US Democrat says a no-fly zone must be prepared now and only brought into force if Gaddafi uses the Libyan Air Force to massacre civilians.
And the Afghan president talks tough with the US, saying apologies for civilian deaths in his country are no longer acceptable. A protracted, drawn-out conflict is how some observers are now describing what's happening in Libya. Some even going as far as calling it the beginning of a civil war. We're off to Libya live in just a moment, but first, this is what we know so far. The government says it's taken on protesters in Tobruk. Sources there, though, tell Al Jazeera that the rebels are still in control. Now, these are the pictures out of Benghazi, the seat of the uprising. The rebels say they're in control there, despite government claims to the contrary. And in the oil-producing town of Ras Lanuf, our sources say there have been airstrikes. Fighting too in Bin Jawad, which the opposition captured briefly before being pushed back by Gaddafi loyalists. Now move further along the coast, and all of these are very close, if not on the water. This is Misurata. The rebels there say they've repelled government forces and are holding on to the city. There are reports from a doctor we've spoken to that at least 18 people there have died. Rebels are also saying that Zawiya has seen off Gaddafi's forces and been liberated. In the capital, Tripoli, there were celebrations as the government claimed that it had crushed the rebellion and retaken fallen cities. Well, Al Jazeera's Tony Bertley is on the road from Ras Lanuf to the town of Bin Jawad. He says rebels are advancing, but it's far from clear whether their campaign's been successful.
There's been a steady stream of opposition fighters going up this road. About 35 kilometres from here, you've got the town of Bin Jawad, and we understand that Gaddafi forces are making a stand there. There's heavy fighting. We have seen a stream of ambulances coming back carrying casualties, but we don't exactly know the extent of the toll at the moment. But this is now a big zone that's of operations. All